Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right into a truly fascinating investigation today, looking at the biological, cultural, and evolutionary realities of the female orgasm. We're going to break down some deeply ingrained myths, dig into the hard data, and figure out what science and sociology actually have to say about human pleasure. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's kick things off with a pretty staggering statistic, 86% versus 65%. What exactly are we looking at here? Well, that is the orgasm rate for lesbian women compared to the rate for straight women. And this just perfectly illustrates, right out of the gate, that the so-called orgasm gap isn't just some purely biological glitch in the female body. I mean, think about it. If women were just biologically wired to have fewer orgasms, those numbers would be identical across the board, right? So if the problem isn't the body itself, what is actually going on here?
Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll tackle the orgasm gap itself, then we'll look at the actual routes to reliable pleasure. After that, we're debunking a very old fertility myth, checking out how race and culture play a role, and finally, we'll lay out the big evolutionary debate.
All right, Section 1, the orgasm gap.
So we've already established that this gap is incredibly wide in heterosexual partnerships, and the why largely points to a sociological concept known as the coital imperative. This is basically society's way of prioritizing penile vaginal penetrative intercourse over literally every other kind of sexual activity. Just think about how sex is portrayed in movies and on TV. It's almost exclusively focused on intercourse. Essentially, our culture has created this scientifically flawed expectation that women can and should reach climax from vaginal penetration alone. And when that doesn't happen, the default assumption is that something must be wrong.
Moving right along to Section 2, Routes to Reliable Pleasure.
So, what actually works for female pleasure? When we look at some incredibly compelling data from researchers Wetzel and Sanchez on partnered sex, it paints a very different picture. A massive 75.8% of heterosexual women report that their most reliable route to climax involves simultaneous vaginal and clitoral stimulation. Only 6.6% rely on vaginal penetration alone. Just let that sink in. Less than 7%. So the big takeaway here is that the coital imperative we just talked about completely ignores the everyday anatomical reality of over 90% of women.
And guys, the data gets even more telling when we switch over to solo sex. During masturbation, a whopping 82.5% of women rely solely on clitoral stimulation. Only a tiny, almost non-existent 1% rely on vaginal stimulation alone. Women absolutely know what works for their own bodies to achieve reliable pleasure, right? But as the numbers show us, that knowledge just doesn't always translate into the standard, expected script for heterosexual partnered sex.
And this physical disconnect, it builds into a truly massive perception gap. Only 22% of women are certain they've ever climaxed from vaginal penetration alone. Yet, somehow, 44% of men are absolutely certain they've given a partner an orgasm this exact way. So why the huge disconnect? Well, societal pressure leads many women to fake orgasms, often because they feel like they're just supposed to reach climax through intercourse alone. And ironically, this just reinforces that male overestimation. It's a real feedback loop of misinformation.
Okay, on to Section 3, Debunking the Upsuck Theory.
Now, if female pleasure isn't guaranteed during partnered sex, why do we have it at all? Let's shift our focus from pleasure over to conception. You might have heard of something called the upsuck theory. It was this very popular mid-20th century idea suggesting that uterine contractions during a female orgasm create a literal suction effect, pulling sperm up into the cervix. I mean, it sounds highly intuitive, doesn't it? It neatly ties a woman's pleasure directly to biological reproduction. But while uterine contractions absolutely do happen during climax, modern medical evidence does not support this theory as the primary driver of conception.
Let's actually walk through the real biological steps of conception. Millions of sperm are deposited, and they begin actively swimming to the cervix within a matter of minutes. Cervical mucus helps them move upward, and they reach the fallopian tubes in just 5 to 20 minutes. And here is the most important takeaway from all of this. This highly efficient process happens whether a female orgasm occurs or not. Sperm are incredibly highly motile, entirely on their own.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is that a lack of orgasm is not a cause of infertility. Modern fertility medicine does not rely on female climax for successful conception. The true pillars of fertility are things like ovulation timing, the health of the sperm itself, fertile cervical mucus, fallopian tube health, and overall hormonal balance. So we can safely lay the upsuck theory to rest for good.
Which brings us to Section 4, Race,
culture, and orgasm.
Now that we've got the biology covered, let's step into the sociological sphere. A really fascinating study of over 27,000 singles revealed that race and ethnicity actually play a deeply significant role in the orgasm gap. The largest gaps between men and women actually exist within white and Asian demographics. Conversely, the smallest gaps are found within Black and Hispanic or Latino demographics. And notably, it was Hispanic and Latino women who reported the highest frequency of orgasm overall.
So, what is driving these demographic differences? Well, researchers point to a few hypothesized cultural factors. For instance, cultures with more conservative views on sexuality tend to prioritize male pleasure and view sex more rigidly, which naturally widens the gap. On the flip side, studies actually show stronger positive body image, specifically genital image, among Black women compared to white women, which positively impacts sexual well-being. Furthermore, Hispanic couples reported a higher frequency of specific sexual practices, like oral sex, which directly provides that clitoral stimulation we now know is so essential for female pleasure.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, the evolutionary debate.
So, if the female orgasm isn't biologically required for conception, where exactly did it come from? There's literally a massive academic clash among evolutionary biologists on this exact question. We're not picking sides here, just looking at the arguments. On one side, you have the adaptation hypothesis. This argues that the female orgasm evolved for a specific reproductive purpose, maybe related to mate selection or pair bonding, even if the strict upsuck mechanics aren't proven. On the other side is the byproduct hypothesis. This camp argues that the female orgasm serves no evolutionary purpose at all. It's simply an embryological byproduct of the male orgasm, much like the fact that men have nipples.
As academic Elizabeth A. Lloyd points out, the scientific nuance required here is immense. She notes that just because a trait has a genetic basis or involves feel-good hormones like oxytocin, that doesn't automatically mean we can just stamp it as an evolutionary adaptation. It could just as easily be a byproduct. Essentially, the scientific jury is very much still out, and both sides are actively researching their claims as we speak.
So as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. How might understanding the true science of our bodies change societal expectations moving forward? Because if we can dismantle this flawed coital imperative and finally let go of these debunked fertility myths, we open the door to healthier, more communicative, and fact-based human connections. When we actually understand the data, we empower ourselves. Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating topic with me today.